So imagine probably one of the most violent people you can think of, somebody who truly has seen real violence, who has put down people hundreds of times in very extreme circumstances, um, dealing with multiple attackers, dealing with just, drunk and obnoxious people, violent people, living that life. And what would you have learned from that life? What if you had a lot of challenges coming up? A lot of demons that you had to exercise. And yet you end up being one of the most prolific writers when it comes to protecting yourself and putting things out there. And yet you get to a certain age and you make a change. You realize that you've conquered your fears, you've conquered your demons, and now you want to make a change. Well, I'm going to introduce you to that guy today. It's somebody who I have a tremendous amount of respect for, and somebody who just really needs no introduction if you have been following the world of self-protection. That would be Geoff Thompson. Now, Geoff, as you see him seated over here, that's how he is today. And that's how I know him. In fact, I had the pleasure of doing a Skype interview with him for personal reasons, just some counseling that Geoff offers. And I found it extremely useful. I was going through a part of my life where I was talking about dealing with all the violence that I had been dealing with, and Geoff was just amazing, kind of putting it on perspective for me. And I've always wanted to do an interview with him about what you're about to hear, and I think you're going to find it amazing. Now, listen, everybody has a different personality type. I have some very flamboyant people that come out here. Lee Morrison jumps to mind. Mark the Animal jumps to mind. Um, you know, Everybody's demeanor is different. Geoff is going to come across as being very zen-like, very calm, but you're going to be very surprised throughout the interview, because when we do talk violence, it is straight talk about violence. This man knows his subject. But listen also to, you know, his journey. It might resonate with a lot of you. A lot of you write me about issues you've had in your lives and how you turned to martial arts and how you're still wrestling with these demons. Well, Geoff had that happen. And I think it's very important that people listen to this part of the interview. So it's a multi-series interview. You'll be hearing more from me, but this is part one of my interview with the amazing Geoff Thompson. Geoff Thompson, thanks so much for doing this interview.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for asking me, Tim, and nice to speak to you again.
I know. I'm gonna let the people know that you and I talked a couple of years ago on a very personal level. It had nothing to do. One of the things that you provide right now is you provide some counseling to people, and we did a session that was really, really great, and we'll talk more about that later. What your services are that way. And that's why I really wanted to have you on. We've had a lot of people on the interviews that I've been doing that are in the industry. A lot of them very well known. Your journey is really interesting to me, because I'm starting to get to that stage where I'm making a transition myself, and I'd really like to hear people, really what where you came from, because like I said, a lot of people probably aren't, there are some people that probably aren't familiar with you, and you've been highly demanded. So I know there are a lot of people that do know, but if you could kind of give your history and your unique relationship with violence over the years,
Yeah.
and then where we're at today. But where did you grow up, and how did it first come in? How did violence first enter your life? And when I say violence, just combat sports, whatever was the impetus.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess, I was born in Coventry in the Midlands of England, and up until the age of 11, I was just going to be a footballer. I went to the big school. You transcend from the junior school, go to the big school at the age of 11, and I was overwhelmed. When I was just overwhelmed, I was the star kid in the small school. Went to the big school, I was like a speck in an ocean of other kids.
Right.
They didn't know I was special, Tim. In the other school, I was special. I was a goalkeeper. The girls liked me. I was special. Went to the big school, I wasn't. I was nobody. And I would say I experienced, it was like at the age of 11, it was like a dark night of the soul. It was like a depression. But of course, I couldn't articulate what I was feeling. I couldn't articulate what was going on in my body. I was hypersensitive. And it was around this time, around about the age of 11, that I found martial arts. And the first martial art I found was Aikido. I think I wanted something more, I wanted something, maybe a stand-up art, like a punching, kicking art. But at the time, there's very little around. This was just before Bruce Lee and before the big explosion of martial arts. So anyway, I ended up in a Aikido class, and I took to it very quickly. And I think my path was to do something special in the world. I felt like there was something very special for me to do. I felt that, but it was interrupted. I think there are energies around us, negative, opposing energies, that interrupt anybody that has a very special path, like a bodhisattva path, where we can, break through boundaries and help other people to do the same. So these forces interrupted my path, and the teacher I had, who I idolized, groomed me and sexually abused me. And it terrified me. It was one of those nights where you wake up and there's a hand on you, and it's invading you, and it's touching you, and you can't see it because it's coming from the back, and you know who it is, and you are terrified. It's like the fact that you can't see it, that it's disembodied, makes it even worse. So I've got this tremendous presence trying to invade me, and I'm spending as much as I can remember of the night trying to fight it off. I wake up in the morning, I go to bed when I'm 11, and I wake up the next day, I'm 100 years old. Right. I know my life has changed. I know my life is off the track. Something in me abandoned me. I feel that something changed at that point, and something else came in. So this guy, it was the betrayal more than the abuse. It was the grooming more than the physical abuse, because that set my psyche off about that much, only that much at the age of 11. But by the time I was 30, I was kicking people's teeth out and stamping on their heads and trying to protect the world from people that were trying to invade them. So by the time I was, 30, I was off the charts. I was a country mile away from where I should have been. So this person impregnated me at the age of 11 with a parasite, which over a period of time grew and took over parts of my will. So even though I left this club, and even though we were disparate, I didn't see him for many, many years, he was in me. We were quantumly, you could say, we were entangled. We were not different. So this guy would abuse me physically and sexually from a distance, as in I couldn't trust my own hands. I abused myself secretly right up until the age, probably into my 30s, probably even later than that. No, I wasn't aware that this was the entanglement. This was the parasite in him that I hadn't got out. Now, if this had been arrested when I was 11, if I'd had the courage to talk to my parents about it, we may have been able to get this parasite out before it settled. But that didn't happen. I was too afraid. And by the time I did share it with them, hoping that I might be met with a cuddle, with some sympathy, with an embrace, we'll fix it for you, I didn't. It was like I'd set a tiger loose in my mum's Sunday morning kitchen, and they didn't know how to cope with it. They were dissonant. I can see they were fearful. They were working class. My mum and dad were working class, and they were very afraid of middle class authority figures. So I was met with coldness, with fear, with questioning, which to an 11-year-old or 12-year-old child sounded very much like blame. So this part of me that had the courage to share it suddenly retreated back into the shell and said, you can't trust people. You can't trust the teacher. You can't even trust the people you love, because your parents are just subtly suggesting maybe this was your fault. Obviously, it's impossible to be your fault. When you're a child, you have no volition. Things are done to you. You have no idea what's happening. But so I buried this, and obviously when you bury a seed, it germinates, it grows. By the time I was in my early 20s with a young family, I'd left the Aikido and I'd continued into karate, but very carefully, very aware, very scared of teachers that might abuse again. By the time I was in my mid-20s, I was like a second dan, but still afraid, still terrified. Could physically very good, but the moment I felt the drop of adrenaline or anxiety, I had no control over it at all. I had no control of my endocrine system, because every time I felt this fear, I was back in that room again. So it was a disproportionate, life-threatening fear, even if it was something as simple as, you know, some change at work or change in the environment. So I had days where I felt like I could change the world, and I had other days where I felt like I couldn't change my own socks because I was so debilitated by fear. I had this moment of in the deepest depths of fear. You know, when you wake up at 4 a.m. in a cold sweat.
Yes.
Am I okay to swear?
Oh yes, absolutely.
And I wake up in a cold sweat and think it's going to be a fucking long day, a long day. You know, it's a long time when you wake up at 4 and your wife's asleep next to you, and she's oblivious. She doesn't understand your terror. And in fact, she's frightened of you because you're following around the house like a puppy because you're so fearful. And that my kids are in the other room, and I'm thinking I can't even protect my kids. And I'm just in this place where I've been to the doctor, he's given me antidepressants, but that just made it worse. It made me feel dull, and it made me feel disengaged. Everybody I'd spoke to, even I picked up books that promised to give me answers, but I could tell even at that age that the writers weren't being brave. They weren't telling the truth. They weren't telling me what I could do. And I remember thinking, when I find the truth, I am going to tell everybody. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell everybody.
Hey, everybody. Hey, if you're enjoying this content, please take the time to go to surviveviolence.com, give us your email, allow us to send you and give you a free masterclass on how to deal with the subjects that we talk about on this channel. Also, please join the channel, hit the subscribe button, notification button, and please share this with all your friends.
At this moment in this depression, where I found a righteous anger, like a rage, and I just thought, I'm not having this anymore. I can't live like this. I've got a wife, I've got children, I've got a life to live. I'm not going to be bullied by this feeling. The moment I had that feeling, this is what I would call a connection with my soul, or a connection with my higher self. This calm, observing voice just said to me, write everything down that you're afraid of. Draw a pyramid, write it down. This didn't come in like in a sentence. It just came in an idea. It dropped into my head like a little pearl of wisdom. So I drew a pyramid on a piece of paper. I wrote down each of my fears on the pyramid, the least fear on the bottom step, the worst fear on the top step. And I systematically started to confront my fears. I didn't realize until maybe a decade later that this was Ushaba's concept of absorbing 99% of what you were afraid of, and then it would dissipate, but you had to absorb 99% of it. This was the technique of Milarepa when he fought demons. This was the technique of St. Francis when he was assailed by demons or demonic thought forms. You intercourse with it. So instead of running away from it, instead of hiding from it, instead of burying it with alcohol, with sex, and with denial, I turned into it and I said, okay, you're here. Come in, have a sit down, have a cup of tea. Do you want to meet my wife? Stay as long as you want. The moment I did that, I felt this ray of hope. And I felt that these powers, as I turned into them, these three-dimensional monsters became two-dimensional cartoons. And when I stayed with them and observed them without engagement, just with curiosity, because the brain has a strange quirk to him. It can't process curiosity and fear at the same time. So just my curiosity dissipated the fear. So I climbed this pyramid through this process of, the first fear, of course, was the fear of admitting I was afraid. I was in this place where I needed to surrender. And so I just said, I'm afraid. These are all the things I'm afraid of. So I started to confront all the things I was afraid of, obvious things, you know,
right.
The fear of spiders, a fear of going to the dentist, the fear of entering karate competitions. Once I started to confront these fears and intercourse with them and turn into them, literally, developing a desensitization, other more subtle fears started to appear below the surface. I was afraid of my wife. I was afraid of marital confrontation. I was afraid of my mum. If I had a tattoo on my arm, I'd hide it because I was afraid of my mum condemning me, even though I was a grown man. I was afraid of change, any kind of change, which is horrible because change is the only constant. I was afraid of success because I didn't know what success meant. I didn't understand success. To us kids, we were uneducated. We were quite ignorant. So to us, success was like a lottery win, or a freak song that drops into your head that you managed to sell and pay your mortgage for the next 60 years, or a 3-book, 7-figure deal, even though you've never written anything before. So all of these fantastical ideas that relied on something else, not us. So we didn't understand what success was. So as I started to write these down, write down that I was afraid of success, it demanded that I look at success. What is it? What does it mean? What does it mean to you? For instance, I was working in a menial job, because I hadn't got enough skills to earn more. And I genuinely didn't understand how to make more money other than to take a second and third job, which I did, which is not tenable for a long term. I didn't know that if I developed skills, I could demand more money in the workplace. If I developed a lot of skills, I could step out of the workplace. I could step away from the vegetable realm, and I could go into the animal realm where I could create my own wealth. I could become entrepreneurial. I didn't understand that. So when I wrote Fear of Success on the pyramid, it demanded answers. It said, what does success mean? So I started to unpick this and started to expand it and started to read and to really challenge myself. And then I realized I'd got some skills. I was a good martial artist. So I thought, well, I could start selling those skills. I could charge X amount an hour and, start doing that. Anyway, so I climbed the pyramid, but all sorts of fears were starting to appear that I didn't even know that were there. So these obvious fears, these were placeholders. They were just kind of obscuring what I was really afraid of. And when I went beyond those fears and went beyond those fears again to the place of denotation, as the Buddha would say, he said that consciousness freed him from denotation. His enlightenment was a freedom from denotation. In other words, when we strip the labels off something, it's all just neutral energy, and we're the players. We're in the game. We can move with it. But if we're in the lower levels and everything's got a label and we believe the label, then certain words and certain phrases, concepts, precepts, cognitions, rule our world. So I started to challenge these feelings, and I started to confront all of the fears. Anyway, the highest fear on my pyramid was a fear of violent confrontation. So I decided to do what any sensible man would do. I took a job in one of the roughest nightclubs in Europe, and thought, well, I'll just spend a couple of weeks there. And
hey, Geoff, could you do, just for clarifications, we have a lot of US people that are in there. Can you explain what you mean? I was in London, and I went to university over there for a year and a half in the late 80s. I'm very familiar with that culture. I think, and it's changed since, but I think people don't really understand when you say you worked at a rough nightclub, what the nightclubs in the UK were like back then and what the door was allowed to do. I mean, it was some of the most professional guys I ever met in my life. And right now, people are thinking of whatever they're experiencing going to a club or something like that. I just want to put the right context in on this for people.
Oh yeah, well, it was Tombstone, really. It was the Wild West. It was we were brought into clubs in Coventry during this specific period to control the violence, because there was so much violence. So at the time, even hot dog vans had a bouncer standing by them, because people would tip up the food vans. And to give an example, Four of my friends were murdered during my stint as a doorman. Lots more were stabbed. Some of them lost their sanity. At least two of them, my very close friends, are doing double life sentences because they fell into drugs and they fell into murder and all the rest of it. It was a hugely violent place. It was one of the places where you search people on the way in for weapons and drugs. And if they didn't have any, you'd give them because the place it was.
They
It was
could survive.
very, very rough place. So every nightclub would have at least 4 good doormen on. The pubs had doormen. So I worked in pretty much all of the major establishments in Coventry. We were there to contain the violence when it fell out. Well, anything that fell outside the law, we contained it. You know, and we had to do that. We had to step outside the law with them. The police couldn't do that. You know, all they could do was contain within the law, but we could step outside of the law. So we were in an environment where people spoke with their fists, they spoke with their feet, you know, and the violence was accepted even by the police. You know, some of the kind of senior policemen at the time used to come and train with me, you know, and they used to come and train with the people I work with because we knew how to guard a door, we knew how to manage a door. So it was very violent. There was never a single night ever when there wasn't some form of violence. So you would be involved in thousands of violent situations, personally in hundreds of fights. It sounds like an exaggeration, but I was working 6 nights a week, so things were kicking off all the time. I was tall, I was skinny, I was balding, and I got a soft voice, I was articulate. So of course I was a red rag for any raging bull that, you know, was having a bad day or a bad week. So there was a huge amount of violence, and it had to be contained by the doorman, because we weren't just protecting the customers from violent people, we were also protecting the license of the club. And if we called the police too many times because of violence on the door, we would lose the license. The club would lose the license. So I would say what we were hired really to protect the license more than the customers. So we did that with the use of violence, but it was at an age before litigation.
Right.
No one was running around trying to sue you. It was just fair game. They come up, if they had a go and they lost, that was just the way it fell. This was just before CCTV cameras. As that started to come, it became a bit more difficult. So, you know, when I left the door, you couldn't get a job if you had a criminal record. When I started the door, you couldn't get a job if you didn't have a criminal record.
Right.
They needed to know you could have a fight.
Right.
And they paid you 4 times the day rate of a skilled worker. So
Yes.
it was, you know, and that's because you're risking your life every single night. And again, it's, you know, this environment that you go into has its own egregore, yeah, has its own kind of being that surrounds it, which is greater than the sum of all the parts. So when you go in, this being, this egregore says, oh, this is Geoff Thompson. This is where he is. This is what he's got. This is what he's here to learn. We'll show him what works. We don't care about etiquette. We don't care about martial arts etiquette. We don't care whether you're a second dan or an 8th dan or desperate dan. What works in this environment, what works. It's not personal. And it's not even moral or ethical. It's just what works. So you go in and pretty much everything you've learned falls away. The first time you're in a confrontation, it falls away because it just will not fit into this sporadic, spontaneous, violent arena where the people attacking you are not aware of what they're going to do next. So you can't predict it. All you can predict is that they will attack, and then you start to learn to read the body signs. But the environment, I used to say that John Anderson taught me, who was our head doorman. I used to say Colin Maynard taught me, but I realized when I started to write prolifically about these situations that the environment taught me. Went in and it said, this is what worked. And I resisted, Tim, because I was a second dan in karate. I'd got my teachers and my gurus and my etiquette. I'd got my classes where I was earning money teaching kata. And this environment says, we don't give a fuck about that. We don't care about that. We care about showing you what works. So in order for you to see what works, you have to let go of all of that. And we'll bring through what's useful in that. So the environment taught me immediately that The concept of blocking and counter didn't work. The concept of trapping and counter didn't work. It was folly. The concept of grappling, as much as I'm a fan, and probably you are,
Yeah.
it was suicide in that environment, because the moment you went to the floor, 10 people stamped on your head. It wasn't a match fight.
Okay, folks, that's it for that segment of the interview. Hope you're enjoying this multi-part series. We'll be posting more content soon. And until then, please remember, go to surviveviolence.com, give us your email address, get your free masterclass. Make sure that you join this channel. You know, the Tim Larkin channel is growing really fast, but I need your help. So not only subscribe to the channel, hit the notifications, but more importantly, share it with your folks. Let them see one video that particularly got to you. That would really, really help us as we are growing the channel. Until next time, all the best.